Welcome to Wherever I Lay My Hat, a podcast about the concept of home. Today's guest is Dan Clouser. I hope I've said that correct, or is it Clouser, Dan?
Clouser, you're right.
Clouser, awesome. After 30 years of successfully leading a non-profit youth sports organization, Dan and his wife Sandy sold their house and all of their stuff in August of 2020 to live full-time in an RV, traveling the country with their golden retriever, Youkilis. Working around Dan's, who is the author of 4 books and counting, speaking schedule, they volunteer at various locations, help others, and tell the stories of their travels and those they meet through blogging, social media, and podcasting. Welcome to the show, Dan.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. And that's something, just touching on the RV piece, as I sort of mentioned off air, that's something that my wife and I have thought about quite a bit. I kind of like the idea of the freedom, though having a 16-month-year-old probably puts a little bit of a dampener on that idea, I think, for the foreseeable future. But it's definitely of interest at some point.
I highly recommend it. When you get the opportunity, I would highly recommend to jump on it.
Awesome. So I'd love to sort of hear a little bit more about kind of how you ended up there. Give us a little bit of your background and kind of how you ended up traveling the country in an RV full time.
Yeah, absolutely. So it wasn't something that was a goal of mine for many years. You know, if you would have talked to me even in 2018, I would tell you that I would probably, die on one of the fields of the sports complex I was running at the time, because I was passionate about it. I loved helping kids, and just really, really enjoyed what I did. And in early 2019, I took 2 solo road trips. One was from Pennsylvania to Texas. And then when I left Texas, I actually went through Louisiana and saw some friends of mine, and then back to Pennsylvania. And about 2 months after that, I did the same thing, going from Pennsylvania down to Orlando, Florida. And those 2 trips, it was really the first time in my life where I took the time and enjoyed the journey. Like I had a specific destination and time that I had to be at both those spots, but I had left a little early to take time. I saw one of my old players in Atlanta, Georgia on my way to Orlando. And then, like I said, I stopped and saw some friends, actually, both when I was in Texas and when I went back through Louisiana. And I kind of had this aha moment during those 2 trips. Just to back up a little bit, my mother took an old 1967 Plymouth Valiant, took the back seat out of it, turned it into a kind of quasi RV back in the 1980s, and traveled all around the country on her own, at her own pace, again, stopping and working for a little bit if she thought she was running low on money, or, she did a lot of volunteer work as well. So those 2 trips, I kind of had this aha moment where it was like, wow, man, I think I finally figured out why Mom did what she did. Now this was, almost 15 years after she'd passed away. And I thought I had an understanding of why she did it, but those 2 trips gave me a much better understanding of why she did it. I was also at that time in the process of adding 10 chapters to my first book, which I'd originally published in 2012. And when I got back from those 2 trips, I had written like I hadn't written in a long time. And again, kind of heard this voice, speaking to me saying, it's time to close this chapter and start a new one. You'll, use your gifts of writing and speaking to touch even more people than what you're touching through youth sports. And initially I completely rejected that thought because, the organization I was running, I had founded, so at that point in my life, 60% of my life I'd spent running this organization. I knew I was touching the lives of kids, and I knew I was changing the kids' lives for the better. And, like I said, I thought that was my calling. I thought that's, where I would die. But I just kept hearing that voice. And, finally, it kind of hit me that, okay, maybe it's time to close this chapter. Again, going back to my mom, I mean, she reinvented herself in her mid-40s after she was done traveling full-time. She went back to school to become a drug and alcohol addictions counselor. So, I'm thinking, well, it really is never too late to make a change. A lot of people think, oh, I'm too old to do this, or, I've been here for so long. And that's really not the case. You can just, you can make whatever change you want to make at any age you want to make it. So I ran the idea past my wife. I said, hey, what do you think about us selling the house and everything and getting in an RV and, traveling around a little bit like my mom did? And she was like, you're completely out of your mind. This is a terrible idea. I don't know why you would ever think this is a good idea. So I kind of let it simmer for a little bit. And she was also going through some issues at her place of employment at the time, where some doors were not opening them up that, we thought were going to be opened up for her. She had been laid off from a company in the oil and gas industry after being there for 23 years, and she was now working in another company in the same field. She went on as a temporary employee, with the expectation that she would be hired full time after, a couple months. We're now going on 2 years, and every time she had that conversation about, okay, when am I going to get hired full time? It would be, derailed somehow, some reason given why, it wasn't happening. And, one day after one of those conversations, she came home and she said, you know what, I think this is a sign as well. I'm in, let's go ahead and do this. So we put everything in motion at that point. I let my board know, my nonprofit, that at the end of that year, we're going to be, stepping away and, figure out an exit plan and all that sort of stuff. And, that, literally put the wheels in motion. And, here we are now, a little over 4.5 years into it and loving every second of it. And the concept of your show about, where you're hanging your hat. I mean, we're recording this right now. I'm looking out at the Gulf of Mexico and Fort Myers Beach, Florida, where, staying in a parking lot and, I can just see the palm trees and the sunshine. And, this is where we laid our hat, tonight. And when we're done recording, we're going to hit the road and we'll lay our hat, another 2 hours, 2.5 hours north of here. So
it's, getting closer to me. I'm up in Birmingham in Alabama, so not that far really. Certainly by American standards, it's around the corner pretty much. Yeah, and I kind of, there's a couple of things you said in there that I kind of want to just explore a little bit with you, which I think is really interesting. That whole focusing on the journey rather than destination piece it's a really interesting one. I travel a lot for my day job. I go all around the world and the US to go to conferences and trade shows and things like that. And you get that conversation, it must be exciting to go to these places. Like, actually, when you go for work, you don't. If you go for a conference, you see a hotel, you see a conference room or a event center, and you might see a restaurant or bar or two. If, and that's literally it. You don't see anything of the city. You don't appreciate anything of it. And it then just becomes the rut, and it becomes like the train that you're on and the cycle and all of that stuff. But one of my, I suppose, guilty pleasures is watching people like Noel Phillips or Jeb Brooks or Michael Downey on YouTube, they're travel bloggers, but they don't blog about the destinations they go to. Their whole blogs, for the most part, are about the journey and the travel, especially Jeb and Noel. They very much do that. And that fascinates me. But, I love watching, a bit of a nerdy thing, I love watching journeys about like long Amtrak journeys or, the Trans-Siberian Express, which is all about the journey, all about enjoying where you are at the moment and experiencing that journey rather than it just being, well, I'm getting from point A to point B in the most efficient way. It's actually sometimes doing it in a really inefficient way is actually the more exciting piece. And then the other thing I sort of wanted to touch on is that never too late piece. And I think that's a really interesting one. I think as human beings, we do that. We restrict ourselves to this idea that I am now 45 or 50 or, even people in life like 30, right? Okay, I can't travel anymore. I have to settle down. I have to do these things. And, someone who's lived in 3 countries and the last one has been for 6, 7, 8 months. Yeah. Nearly 9 months in the US now. And I did that in my mid 40s. Nothing's too late. Life is, this is one of these things you think people go, I've done this and I'm stuck with it. There's almost no decision that can't be undone. Right. It's
very true.
Anything can be, you can change your mind and go back and do things. So just kind of want to talk a little bit again now about kind of how your journey and what you're doing now has changed your viewpoint of what home means to you. Obviously found a lot of peace and a lot of purpose is probably the word rather than peace in what you were doing before in doing the youth coaching or youth facility and training and sports. And that would have given you, I suspect, a sense of grounding and a sense of place. How has that changed now moving into much more of a nomadic lifestyle?
It, I mean, it's really changed our perspective because, again, anywhere we are, we're home. We're sleeping in our own bed. Just a few weeks ago, I spoke at a conference up in Orlando where we actually, just the way the conference was set up, we had to actually be in a hotel room. So the RV was in the parking lot, and we were actually, and that was very odd to me to have to pack a bag and, walk from the parking lot up to the room and, stay in a room. I mean, it was neat to an extent, but it was also very different from what we're used to. Normally, that was the first time I hadn't slept in, our own bed and who knows how long. But I think one of the things that's changed perspective is just really, enjoying the moment where we're at. We've been blessed, we've got friends and family scattered all throughout this country, and, former players of mine are, all throughout the country. So, we've been able to see them at a rate that we certainly wouldn't be able to see them at if we were, still in a, brick and mortar home back in Pennsylvania. Um, and that really allows us the opportunity to kind of cherish those moments. And, as a former coach, anytime I have the opportunity to get together with one of my players, it is just such an incredible blessing because, a lot of times coaching youth sports is a very thankless job. Most of the phone calls and emails that you get are not telling you you're doing a great job. It's, why is Bobby batting where he's batting or not playing, or why is Susie in right field when she should be in, at shortstop or whatever the case is. So when you have the opportunity to reconnect with these players, decades after you've coached them and see the impact they're making in the world and how they've, become mothers and fathers and, husbands and wives is really very rewarding. And like I said, I mean, I've been blessed that, I loved that first career, so a lot of times people, when they hear that we did this, they're like, oh, you must have hated your job. You're in a dead end job. You needed to make a change. And that was not the case at all. Like I said, it was actually an internal battle for me to kind of, buy into this concept, so to speak. But now that we have, we have no exit plan. People ask us, like, how long are you guys going to be doing this? And it's, as long as we're healthy, you just don't know. I mean, since we've started this, so many of our friends who had, plans for tomorrow and next year and 2 years from now have passed or have had a health incident that, has not allowed them to, fulfill those dreams, so to speak. So for us, it's just really cherishing the moment that we're in and take advantage of it for as long as we possibly can. So I don't know if I really answered your question there, if I just kind of rambled a little bit.
That's the whole point of this podcast, is that piece. Is that, so no, I think you did, to be fair, though. I think that's just touching on that point a little bit more again about the sports coaching. I think that's something that is underlooked in that type of role. Is there's a difference between elite performance coaching and youth coaching, in that elite performance coaching is generally just trying to eke the difference in that last 5% of performance out of someone. Whereas youth coaching, it's not just about the sport, it's about molding the person and trying to make them better people, not just better sports people. And that, in terms, I think do you think that in terms of your players, it often gave them a sense of home that was lacking elsewhere, or it doubled down on those things? How do you think that impacted for them? I know it's hard to talk for other people a little bit, but.
No, I definitely know for a fact that it impacted them. And again, because of now being able to reconnect with them, and them literally telling me, if it wasn't for the years I played with you, I wouldn't be the person I am today, and just the number of, former players' weddings that we've been invited to. And I mean, it's such a huge honor. You don't really think of it so much, but, I mean, that's literally the biggest day in, most people's lives, is the minute, the moment they're, exchanging vows with the person they're wanting to spend the rest of their lives with. And for you to be invited to be a part of that, it's very much an honor. So yeah, definitely have been able to see that in motion, that, you know, because I always did take a philosophy of, it was about teaching the life lessons that were instilled within the game more so than winning and losing. And, we won our fair share of championships. I've coached players that have gone and played on, professionally. I've got one of my former players right now is the assistant general manager for the Houston Astros. So, winning was a focus, but it wasn't the primary focus. We were definitely an organization, and I had a coaching style that if you took care of the little things throughout the process of preparing for the game, the winning would take care of itself. So it wasn't, hey, we've got to do this. It's like, hey, if we do this little thing and this little thing and this little thing and this little thing, then the end result should turn out to be a W. And if it's not, then what can we learn? What fell apart in that process that, created the loss instead of the win? And how do we rectify that for the next time we take the field?
And I think this isn't necessarily a sports podcast, but this is something very close to my heart. I've coached at a reasonable level, and I've played a lot, and I've been a chairman of a soccer club in New Zealand and those sort of things. And I think that's something that is lacking in non-elite sport. And and by that, I mean, even like community sport or youth sport, or even high level youth sport, I would put in that bracket, is that if you build the right culture and the right work ethic and the right things, the results will come. It shouldn't be about, okay, we're going to do everything to win on Saturday. It should be, we're doing everything to win so we build a team that can win every Saturday, and I think it's that if you build that culture and people buy into, the philosophy or the process because they see the benefit in it to them and to others, then they do it. Whereas if it's, I'm going to pick, this person who's perhaps toxic to the culture of the organization every week because they're the best player and they're not going to see people, then you lose the rest of the squad or you lose the rest of the team. So I think what you said there and looking after little things is so important in that field. And that's why you get people inviting you to their weddings, right? Because they've bought into that philosophy and it feels like a safe and happy place for them.
Yeah. And, our recruiting process, we said oftentimes we weren't necessarily looking for the best player for our team. We were looking for the right player for our team. And that's something that translates into business, and into life. And that's one of the beautiful things about teaching that philosophy is, at the end of the day, even though I love to say about, the number of players that have gone on to play professionally or were, high level collegiate players, at the end of the day, the vast majority of the players I coached did not go on to play professional baseball. And many didn't even go on to play collegiate baseball, but they were able to use those lessons that they learned on the field to become productive members of society. And those are the ones I'm even more proud of than the ones who did continue their career in baseball.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's, I can't remember the quote now. I was just trying to find it and I didn't have it in hand, but there was a piece around what Nick Saban, who's obviously a winning coach, and obviously used this clips of him yelling and screaming and doing all of these things. But actually, when you look at his philosophy about how he treated his players and when things weren't good, it was about the culture building piece. It was all about, and that's one of the reasons he doesn't he retired, right? It wasn't just because, he saw the end, but the whole, and look, I believe the players should be paid for their performance. I'm a big, if there's hundreds of $1 million in a sport, the players should be getting some of that, not just the $70,000 tuition, right?
Yeah.
But I think the changes for him around, the NIL money and the transfer, I think it was the transfer portal rather than the money. And I think he's come out and said that it was the transfer portal piece where you no longer got the chance to work with players and you no longer got the chance to build players. And I think if you look at, and I don't know how much you follow college football, but living in Alabama now, it's, you can't help it. It's everywhere. But there's a 17-year-old freshman called Ryan Williams, wide receiver for Alabama, who's a phenom at 17. Like, he does things as a wide receiver that are just years above his schedule. He's 17. He said 1 year at Alabama, he's likely to go in the transfer portal and go to a different college because he can see the money. I have no issue with him taking the money, and the money should go to players, but it does make it hard to build that culture and that learning piece where you grow young men and young women into being something more than they could be. It then becomes it takes college sport into that transactional professional level, which I think wasn't really what it was designed for.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, sadly, unfortunately, that's one of the things in our country that we never can find the happy medium, so I'm with you. I think players should have been getting paid all along. I think we took it from, zero to, 100,000 overnight, where instead of gradually building it, because, even in youth sports, especially in like travel sports, you see, players moving and there's no money involved here. It's just, what they or their parents may think is the better opportunity. One bad season, now all of a sudden they want to jump to a team that is, a winning team or something like that if they had one losing season. And that's not really what life is all about. Life is, again, about working through that and, building it up. And that's one of the things that, I'm very proud of is we had a lot of players that came onto our organization at a young age, at 10, 12 years old, and stayed with us through their senior year of high school. And again, I think that said a lot. And that wasn't because we won championships every year in between there. There were some kids that stuck through us. There's some lean age groups where, maybe our, one age group was having a down year, but they stuck around and then they moved up in the next year, for whatever reason, that same group of kids with a couple, components changed turns into a championship caliber team, so there's a lot to be learned. Again, going back to that process as opposed to, oh, things aren't good here. Let's just jump ship. Because again, that's just not how life is. I mean, if you think of the workplace or a marriage, not every day in a marriage is, fun in the sun. It's, it's work. And if you're taught that culture of not having that commitment to work through those difficult times, it just makes it so easy to walk away from anything in your life at that stage of the game. So I do think the transfer portal is something that, hopefully can be addressed down the road and still allow the kids to, take advantage of some of that money that the NCAA and the schools are raking in by the truckload.
Yeah. And it's about, and I think you touched on there, right? If you never learn to face adversity, you never learn to work out how to get by when things are hard, then at some point you're going to hit a brick wall in life, because it's never plain sailing for everyone, so I think that's a really good point. Talking of that and segueing a little bit, what were the challenges you found when moving from a life that was centralized in a single place to the sort of nomadic? What are the challenges that you faced? What's been the difficult bits about that journey?
Probably one of the most difficult things, and it's kind of, good and bad, is, developing. There is no routine, which is good, but there are some times in life where you need a routine, as you know, I too host a podcast. So there's times where, just getting the time to be in a spot long enough to be able to go back and edit and get stuff ready to release, making sure that, where I'm going to be recording a podcast has good internet, like even with this here as being a guest on a podcast, I'm running internet tests and making sure we're going to be at a good spot when I jump on the computer with you. So, from a quote unquote business angle, that's probably just the most challenging thing. And, it didn't take long to, really develop, what that routine would be. Like my own show, I make sure that we're recording on Tuesdays, and then we just schedule our travels around a spot where I know I'm going to be, at a stable spot with good internet connection on a Tuesday to record. So, that's probably been the biggest challenge. I mean, it's, and it's funny how we've, our travels have changed. Like when we first started traveling, I mean, we didn't, a lot of times on a Wednesday, we didn't know where we would be on Saturday. Now we're a little bit more, organized, so to speak, in that way, but that's really only because of my book signing schedule, so a lot of our travel revolves around, where I'm signing and that sort of stuff. So, but it seems funny when I tell people, like, we really, the highs are so much greater than the lows on this journey for us. And I know, things go wrong at times. An RV is still, it's literally a house on wheels. So, I mean, things go wrong. And, we've just been fortunate enough that when stuff has gone sideways for us, we've been in a position or in a spot where we could get it rectified, rather quickly. So, really just the logistics of, um, being at the spot where I have to do what I have to do as far as the podcast and that sort of stuff, and the work that goes in, again, recording is the first step of it. Then everything else you got to do, as you well know, to get it actually out on the internet, is a whole another kettle of fish. So there are times where I may, I generally release a new show on a Friday, so there's times where I'm finishing up editing on Thursday night. And part of that is honestly just my own procrastination. And part of it is just a travel schedule that it's like, I couldn't carve out an hour or two to sit and, get it knocked out.
Yeah, it definitely takes longer to edit these and get them up than it does to record them. The recording is definitely the quick bit.
Yeah.
What about the real high points? What is it that's made you fall in love with the lifestyle that you're now living? That's made you think, well, we're going to keep doing this as long as we healthily can. What are the real key things there?
The people we've met, and the people we've been able to reconnect with. And I touched on it a little bit with, my players and stuff, but, the RV community is such a special, special community. Even just a couple weeks ago, some friends of ours that are also full-time RVers that we met on a volunteer project years ago, we found out we were both, in Orlando at the same time. So after I'd spoken at that conference, we went ahead and, booked 2 nights at the campground that they were at. And, we hadn't seen them since, April when we were on another volunteer project with them, and, just having the opportunity to sit and reconnect with them and, following all of our other nomad friends and their journeys. And, there's times where we'll decide to go to a place because one of our friends posted, that, hey, we were at such and such place. It was a great stay, or even, restaurants that they'll stop at, like there's a place out in California called, Peggy Sue's 50s Diner that, friends of ours had posted how great it was. So we made it a point that when we were in California to stop at that diner and check it out. And, we loved it. So, that's really the high, is just the people and really understanding that, as polarized as what our, society may be, if you actually just take the time, sit down, have conversations with people, you're going to understand that they're much, much more deeper than whatever their political views may be, So I've got friends of mine that are on both sides of the spectrum. I consider myself right down the middle for the most part. And I think you find most people are more to the middle than they are the extremes if you sit down and have that conversation with them, So that's probably been the highs. At the end of the day, we found out that we're all human beings and we really do have the same hopes and dreams and desires as what the vast majority of the rest of us do.
And I think that's there's a whole load to explore in that I could go to. But I think on a previous episode of this podcast that hasn't hit the air yet, but will do before this one comes out, I interviewed a gentleman called Dr. Scott Allen, who does he's a doctor that works with the immigration detention centers, and he's done a lot of work in corrections and stuff like that. And his thing is, both when you get too much stuck in ideology, you take the humanity out of everything. Everything then becomes a number, or they become their political affiliation, or they become the bubble or the echo chamber that they're in. And actually, when you break it down, every human is flawed. They have their own opinions. They all want to know things. And I find that, because I travel so much work, you're constantly meeting new people. And there's a lot of people who I do not agree with on a lot of things. But you can still be friends with them because you can find humanity. Now, there's obviously going to be limits to that, but I think you're right. It's find that humanity and, that freedom in just being able to talk to people and listen to other people's viewpoints and actually, touch on that sort of things.
Yeah.
Sort of last real question for you is, if someone was looking to take the plunge and go down the RV lifestyle or the nomadic lifestyle, what are the recommendations or what advice would you give them?
Number one is just do it. Don't try to get it all figured out before you do it. Just do it. So, I tell people all the time, because a lot of times they think that my wife and I were RVers our whole lives, that we would do weekend camping and that, we've had an RV forever. But, the truth of the matter is I never drove an RV until the day I drove this thing off the lot, so we were completely green, but there's so many resources out there between YouTube. There's books out there. Our one daughter did purchase a book for us. It was a beginner's guide to living in an RV full time or something like that. It was absolutely an incredible, wealth of information in there that, we are so glad we read through it ahead of time. And again, you go back to that RV community. It's so giving that you will find people to help you out along the way if there's something that stumps you. I also tell people that I am probably the least mechanically handy full-time RVer in the world, but yet, we've had times where our water pump failed on us. We had to replace it. We happened to be at a volunteer project when it happened. And the one guy already had a spare water pump, that he just, gave it to me and, told me just order one on Amazon, and when it comes in, give me that one. But this way we can get you back up and running right now. They didn't do the repair for me. They stood over my shoulder and told me how to do it and showed me how to do it, which again, when we started, if you'd have told me a couple years into this journey, I'd be switching out the water pump of the RV, I'd be like, I don't think that's happening. But again, it's the way the community is to, really kind of rise up and support you. So, if you're thinking of doing it, do it. You don't have to have it all figured out. We're still figuring stuff out along the way. And I think that's the beauty of it, and relying on that community. I mean, just being in a campground is a different culture. When you're taking a walk, people say hello to you, they smile at you, they wave. Unlike when you might be walking down, a city street where people are trying at all costs to avoid making contact with you, because God forbid you might say good morning. So it's a different culture. So if it's something you're thinking about, just do it. Don't worry about all the details. They'll work themselves out throughout the journey for sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dan. It's been awesome to have you on.
Absolutely.
I'd love you to do a quick plug for your books and the podcast and your podcast, and I'll include some details of those in the show notes as well.
Yeah, absolutely. If people want to reach out to me, find my podcast, my blogs, buy any of my books, just go to my website, which is journeymymotherson.com. Or if that's too much of a mouthful, you can just go to danclouser.com, and they both go to the same site. So yeah, you can reach out, book me for speaking engagements, buy any of my books, check out any of my past podcasts. It's all right there on the website, and it'll take you to all of my socials from there as well, if people want to follow me on any of the socials.
And I will include that link in the show notes if people do find it too much of a mouthful, so make sure they've got that as well. And again, thank you so much, Dan, and thank you for listening to this week's episode of Wherever I Lay My Hat. As I said before, this is a story about you and the journeys that you have and your definition of home. So if you're interested in featuring on an episode, please reach out. You can just email me at dan@whereverIlayMyhat.com. And again, thank you so much, and I hope you enjoyed today's show.